The witch trials ended not because people stopped believing in witches. They ended because the money ran out. That's not a metaphor. That is, when you follow the actual financial records left behind by the actual courts that ran the actual trials, what the evidence points to. And once you see it, the story you thought you knew becomes very hard to tell the same way again. Picture a courtroom. Somewhere in Germany, 1628. The man asking the questions is being paid by the hour. The jailer is billing by the day. The scribe recording the confession is charging by the page. And when this is all over, every one of those invoices will be settled from the same account. The estate of the accused. What happens to the verdict when everyone involved gets paid more if it goes one way? We think we know this story. Fear. Superstition. Mass hysteria. Ordinary people turning on their neighbors and calling it justice. It's a comfortable explanation. But here's what doesn't fit. The fear was everywhere. The cold, the plague, the wars. Every village in Europe faced the same darkness. And yet, witches didn't appear everywhere. Some communities burned their neighbors. Others, living through the same collapse, never once lit a pyre. And when you look at who was accused, across different countries, different decades, different languages, they shared one thing. They had something worth taking. So here's the question that doesn't go away. If this was about belief, why did the devil seem to find his servants in the same tax bracket? The question hangs there. Same fear, same famine, same collapsing world. But the trials only ignited in certain places, around certain people. To understand why, you have to understand what Europe looked like in the century when the witch trials exploded, because it wasn't random. Nothing about it was random. Start with the weather. For reasons no one understood and no one could control, temperatures across the northern hemisphere dropped and stayed down. Harvests failed. Not once, not twice. Year after year, the fields came up short. Hunger stopped being an emergency and became a season. And when people are hungry for that long, they stop asking what happened and start asking, who did this? They needed someone to blame. Then the wars came. The 30 Years' War, a conflict that tore through Central Europe for 3 decades, didn't just kill people. It bankrupted the men who ran the territories. Local lords who had once governed in relative stability now faced something unfamiliar. Empty treasuries. Tax collection was slow, politically dangerous, never quite enough. They needed another way to raise money, something faster, something cleaner, something that looked like justice. And over all of it, the church was fracturing. The Protestant Reformation had cracked the Catholic monopoly on truth. Now there were competing authorities, competing answers, competing visions of who the devil was working through. Every faction needed to prove it was the one fighting evil most effectively. Hunting witches wasn't just religious duty. It was a power move. Fear. Empty treasuries. A war for religious authority. 3 pressures. Building at the same time, in the same places, squeezing the same communities. But here's what's important. The witch trials didn't start here. They started earlier. Much earlier. And in the beginning, the targets looked completely different. The accused were the people at the edges, the poor, the isolated, the old women no one would miss. Belief drove it. Fear drove it. There was no system yet. Just suspicion and verdicts and fire. Then the pressure built. And somewhere in that pressure, the targets started to shift. Away from the margins, toward the center. Away from the poor, toward the people with something worth taking. That shift had a name. It had a structure. And that structure is what changed everything. Every cost of the trial was paid by the accused. Read that again, because it's easy to miss how much is hiding inside that one sentence. The interrogator's daily wage, the jailer's fee, the scribe who recorded every word of the confession, the cost of the torture equipment, the wood for the pyre, the rope, the travel expenses of the officials who rode in from the next town to oversee the proceedings. Every line item, billed to the defendant, drawn from their assets, before the verdict, during the trial, and after the sentence. And whatever remained when it was over went directly to the authority that ran the court. This wasn't incidental. This was the architecture. Think about what that means for everyone inside that system. A quick acquittal meant nothing. Less than nothing. The officials still needed to be paid, and now there was no estate to draw from. But a conviction that came after weeks of interrogation, careful documentation, thorough investigation of a defendant with substantial assets. That was a transaction. The longer the trial ran, the more money flowed. The wealthier the accused, the deeper the well. Every person with any power over the process, the lord who owned the court, the lawyer who ran it, the interrogator who extracted the confession, was financially better off if the verdict went one way. Not one person in that room was neutral. Now, here's what that looks like in practice. The German city of Bamberg, 1626. A small city, 12,000 people. You could walk across it in 20 minutes. Over the next 5 years, nearly 1,000 of them were executed as witches. Nearly 1,000. 1 in every 13 residents. But look at who they were. Not the outcasts, not the beggars. The accused included city councilmen, lawyers, wealthy merchants, and eventually the very men who were supposed to be running the system. The targets kept moving upward, toward money, toward property, toward anyone with an estate large enough to make the process worthwhile. When the imperial court finally intervened and forced the trials to stop, investigators examined the financial records. The officials running the confiscations had grown wealthy. The city itself was nearly bankrupt. The pool of valuable targets had run dry. That is not a coincidence you can explain with theology. Now, before you reach for the word conspiracy, stop. This is not a conspiracy theory. Conspiracies require secret rooms, coordinated plans, someone drawing up a blueprint. None of that was necessary here. All you need is a system that pays people more for one outcome than another. Build that system, and you don't need to tell anyone what to do. You don't need to corrupt anyone. You don't need a villain. The structure does the work. It always does. Bamberg was not the last time this happened. Jakarta, May 1998. The Indonesian economy is collapsing. The rupiah, the national currency, has lost nearly 80% of its value in less than a year. Rice, cooking oil, flour, the things a family needs to survive have become overnight unaffordable. People are hungry. People are furious. And that fury has a logical target. President Suharto has held power for 32 years. His regime is built on military loyalty, political suppression, and a small circle of connected families who control enormous portions of the national economy. The students are in the streets. The pressure is building. Something is about to break. And then the fires start. Not at government buildings, not at the homes of ministers or generals or the men who actually designed the policies that broke the economy. The fires start in Chinatown. Across Jakarta, across Medan, across Solo, ethnic Chinese neighborhoods are burning. Shops looted, businesses destroyed, homes set alight. The ethnic Chinese, roughly 3% of the population, had for decades been cast in a specific role. Visible in commerce, excluded from political power, useful as a symbol of economic inequality, and entirely without protection when the moment came to need it. Suharto's government called the riots spontaneous, the natural expression of a people's frustration. Unplanned, organic. Later investigations told a different story. Evidence emerged from human rights organizations, from military insiders, from the pattern of the violence itself, that elements within the Indonesian armed forces had coordinated the targeting. meetings between army officers and criminal proxies, fires that spread in patterns too organized for a mob acting alone. The fury of people in genuine crisis, real hunger, real desperation, real rage, had been redirected. Away from the men holding power, toward the men holding shops. Place that next to Bamberg. 17th century Germany. Harvests fail, treasuries empty, pressure builds. The violence lands on people with property. Their assets flow toward the men running the system. 1998 Indonesia. Currency collapses, hunger spreads, pressure builds. The violence lands on people with property. Their assets flow toward the men running the system. The centuries change. The ideology changes. From theology to ethnic resentment, the costume shifts. The structure does not change. That's the thing that stays with you once you've seen it. Not the specific details, not the courtrooms, not the riots, not the names of the cities. Those change. Those have always changed. What doesn't change is the shape of it. A crisis that produces real suffering. A population that needs an explanation. A target, already marginalized, already stripped of full protection, placed in the path of that need. And somewhere behind it all, people who had something to gain from where the anger landed. This isn't cynicism. It's a pattern, and patterns can be recognized. Which means the question isn't whether this is happening somewhere right now. It probably is. The only question that has ever mattered when the fires start, is this. When a society decides, with sudden and overwhelming conviction, that a particular group of people is the source of its suffering. Don't ask whether the fear is real. The fear is always real. Ask who benefits from where it's pointed. And then ask something more specific. Does the target have property? And after the verdict, where does it go?